The elderly father-in-law, who was supposedly blind and needed care, was neglected while my husband and his mother went out and enjoyed themselves. They left me to care for him while they did as they pleased. One day, the supposedly blind father-in-law suddenly stood up. What happened to him? Would I be able to confront my husband and his mother about their behavior? My name's Annie. I'm 33 years old. I want to share a real experience from my life. I was born as the only girl among 3 siblings. I grew up being adored by my dad. Despite his objections, I married my current husband at the age of 30. I moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, into my husband's family home, with my crying dad and laughing mom waving us off. Dad didn't approve of the marriage because of living with the in-laws and the need to care for my father-in-law. Mom always said to follow my heart no matter what. But Dad didn't think too highly of my mother-in-law or my husband. I loved my husband, and he was initially kind, so I persuaded my parents and we got married. Now, there's no trace of that initial kindness in him. The power dynamics in the house favored by my mother-in-law and husband over my father-in-law. He was diagnosed as blind a few years ago, and now mostly stays home. Originally, they had several caregivers and aides, but after I married, my mother-in-law and husband, claiming it was too expensive, dismissed them all without consulting anyone. My father-in-law wished to keep at least one male caregiver he was familiar with. I insisted that my husband, being a man, should help with bathing and personal care. Reluctantly, my husband agreed to retain that male caregiver. This caregiver had been assisting the family even before my father-in-law's blindness. I'm responsible for the mornings, evenings, and one full day a week when the caregiver isn't present. My husband and his mother began treating me like a substitute caregiver. Even though I work full-time remotely for a company, they expect me to be available all the time. When I raised my concerns, they retorted, "Why do you think we allowed you, with your caregiving license, to marry into this family? Just manage that baggage quietly." They referred to my father-in-law as baggage. It's ironic because most of their expenses are covered by my father-in-law's wealth. Yet my mother-in-law's treatment of him is atrocious. And my husband, speaking of his own father, has even said, "If only he'd pass away sooner, we'd get the inheritance." Even though I wanted to divorce my husband, I couldn't bear the thought of my father-in-law being mistreated in my absence. I felt too sorry for him to leave. On their days off, my mother-in-law and my husband would leave me to care for father-in-law and go out, enjoying themselves and shopping carelessly. Originally, father-in-law was a significant landowner. He owned several properties, which brought in a steady passive income. The management was handled by hired professionals. I only managed the payments. But mother-in-law and my husband would siphon off that money from the bank account and used it as they pleased. When I talked to father-in-law about this, he said, "I see. My wife and son only see me as a cash cow. I'm sorry for burdening you with my care." He apologized to me. Please don't apologize. Using my caregiver's license is what I desire. My work is home-based, and helping you, father-in-law, isn't a problem. Taking care of father-in-law wasn't burdensome. My issue was with mother-in-law and my husband, who neither did housework nor worked, yet acted all high and mighty. My resentment towards the do-nothing duo grew stronger. Then one day, mother-in-law and my husband said they were going to the Caribbean. "We'll be gone for 2 to 3 weeks. Don't do anything unnecessary." Wait, 2 to 3 weeks?
"We're leaving you here for your caregiving, so just do your job."
That's why they were packing their bags so happily and excitedly a week in advance. When my husband and mother-in-law left the house, I took a moment to relax. To my surprise, father-in-law started changing into a suit on his own. I was taken aback and stared in shock.
"Come on, dear, let's go."
What? In his suit, he stood before me, and it was clear from his eyes that he wasn't blind. Father-in-law, can you see?
Not perfectly. Blindness can't be cured completely.
Saying this, father-in-law handed me a business card indicating where he wanted to go. 3 weeks later, an oblivious husband and mother-in-law returned, relaxed from their trip. Fun times always end too soon. We're back to reality in the blink of an eye.
Do we have to face this gloomy face again?
Next time, let's go to the Maldives. The moment they returned, they began complaining about father-in-law and me. 10 minutes after their return, the doorbell rang. I answered through the monitor. When I went to the front door, 2 men in suits stood there.
Wait, I recognize one of them.
Mother-in-law and my husband looked puzzled. Oh, it's James's lawyer. What brings you here? As the two wondered, father-in-law walked into the living room. He guided the lawyers to a chair and sat down himself.
Did he just walk and sit down by himself? You two, sit here.
Not understanding, but reluctantly, they sat down and looked at the lawyer quietly. I was called over by my father-in-law and took a seat next to him.
Today, I've set up this meeting for 3 reasons. The first one is about your husband's affair.
As he said this, my father-in-law pulled out a photograph from an envelope. In it, there was my husband, my mother-in-law, and a woman I didn't recognize. The intimacy captured in the photo clearly showed that something was going on. Who's this woman? Neither my husband nor my mother-in-law said a word in response. More photos came out of the envelope. There were several showing my husband with his arm around a woman, clearly enjoying her company, and others of them entering a hotel. The photos were taken at different times and places.
I've known about your husband's infidelity since he married you. He didn't just go to the Caribbean with the 2 of you, did he? He was with her too. With all this evidence of his cheating, there's no denying it. Why? How did you?
It seems my husband believed he had gotten away with it. In truth, I hadn't noticed. Between work, household chores, and caregiving, I had little time to think about it. I just assumed he was having fun outings just with his mom.
Don't you have anything to say to her?
My husband awkwardly glanced at me. Then, breaking the tension, well, if we've been found out, so be it. Yes, you're just a caregiver to him. He has a new partner now. A so-called common-law wife, if you will. My mother-in-law remarked, laughing. Is this true? Even when I directly confronted my husband, he could only mumble, well. He didn't even attempt to explain. We've recently rented a place for just the 2 of them. While they're enjoying their time, I stay alone in a hotel. Don't you think she makes a better wife for my son than you, who can't even spend time with him? According to my mother-in-law, this has been going on for over a year. If you wanted to do such a thing, you should have divorced me. Oh, I did think about letting him divorce you, but she doesn't want to take care of James, so what can we do? In another couple of years, we can just put James in a facility. That's what I thought. She spoke without a hint of remorse. Hearing all this, I couldn't hide my shock and disbelief.
Well, that's how it is. I'm fine with you divorcing right now, but since you'd be abandoning caregiving, don't expect any compensation in the divorce settlement.
In a flash, my sorrow turned to anger.
Enough is enough. You can't just say whatever you want, playing with her life like it's some kind of game.
Father-in-law jumped up with energy and yelled at the 2 of them. Husband and mother-in-law were taken aback, but... You've been hiding something too. You can actually see, can't you? Otherwise, how could you walk around your room and sit down by yourself? Mother-in-law quickly retorted.
That's right, you lied to us.
Husband desperately tried to change the subject.
It's not a lie. I did go blind, but it's partial blindness. I'm not completely blind. I've been undergoing treatments, and right now I'm at an intermediate stage.
Why then did you pretend you can't see?
Pretend? You all assumed that on your own. When I woke up with bad eyesight one morning, got checked at the hospital with a home giver, and came back in a wheelchair, it was you all who jumped to conclusions and started making funny faces in front of me, thinking I couldn't see. You saw all of that? If you knew we misunderstood, why didn't you tell us? That's not fair. Not fair. The home caregiver tried to correct you, but I stopped her. I wanted to see how things played out. After all, it seemed like you both were happy about my blindness.
At those words, both husband and mother-in-law looked away. It hadn't even been a month since father-in-law's blindness when I married my husband. All I had heard from him was,
"My father is blind."
I too had assumed he was totally blind.
Another thing is divorce. What daughter-in-law and my son decide to do is up to daughter-in-law. If needed, I can introduce you to a lawyer. But the divorce I'm talking about isn't between the two of them. It's between you and me.
Father-in-law stared straight at mother-in-law as he said this. Divorce? Who does that?
If that's the case, let's talk about the last point. I want my money back.
Turns out father-in-law had been giving mother-in-law a living allowance every month. However, thinking the blind father-in-law wouldn't notice, mother-in-law had dipped into other savings. Worst of all, it was from the inheritance left by my father-in-law's father.
You always had a tendency to be lavish with money. That's why I arranged for a set amount to be transferred to you through the home caregiver. But knowing you, I thought you might spend from other sources when you learned about my blindness. That's why I kept separate accounts for my earnings and the inheritance.
A year later, when he checked with the bank, around $60,000 had been spent in just that year. $60,000? It was astonishing that mother-in-law could waste so much money every month. If I had that kind of money in a year, I wouldn't even know what to buy. But for mother-in-law with her spending habits, it seems like pocket change. I can't possibly pay that back. Plus, it's my money too, right? Whether it's an inheritance or whatever, I can use it as I please.
You don't understand inheritance law? Even if we divorce, that inheritance won't go to you. If you can repay that money all at once, I'll let you stay and not proceed with the divorce. But if you can't, consider that $60,000 as property division and quietly agree to a divorce.
The real estate owned by father-in-law also originally came from his father's inheritance, so his wife, mother-in-law, couldn't claim it in a property division. But...
Dad, I realize now how wrong I've been all this time. I want to change. Can you please forgive me for everything?
The husband clung desperately to his father's feet.
Daughter-in-law, what will you do? Do you still want to be with this lazy cheater?
No, I've come to see the light. I realize how silly it was to put up with him just because I loved him. Can you recommend a lawyer? I'll be seeking compensation in the divorce proceedings and will be divorcing him. I lost all feelings for my husband and decided to demand compensation in the divorce proceedings. At the same time, I got a divorce application from a meticulous lawyer and signed it right there.
Wait a second. I don't have the money to pay any compensation. You can start a part-time job or whatever and pay it back. I'll let you stay in this house for a while because of our son, daughter-in-law. Not because he's my son, but to keep an eye on him.
My husband, tears in his eyes, apologized to me and signed the divorce application and the compensation agreement.
Also, I want to give you a portion of my assets as a token of my gratitude and apology. I'd rather give it to you than to my son.
What he handed me was a copy of his will. Wait, what is this?
The original is with the lawyer. I can't give it to you now. When I pass away, the lawyer will contact you. At that time, I want you to accept my assets.
The will stated that a portion of his property and bank deposits would be inherited by me. I can't accept this. I'd only been with them for just over a year. I haven't done anything special to deserve this from father-in-law.
No, that's not true. You stood by my side and tried to protect me. even when the two of them said such terrible things.
Father-in-law said with a gentle smile. What? Why are you giving it to that young woman? I've been with you for many more years.
Quiet! What have you done for me? From the moment we got married, you left all the household chores to the help. And weren't you the same with raising our son? It was me and the maids who looked after him when we was young. I know about your affairs and that you spent money on your lovers. It's shameful what you and our son have done.
Even my husband looked surprised at father-in-law's words.
Wait, Mom said it was Dad who had the affair, and that she raised me all by herself. What's going on?
Mother-in-law looked nervous, her eyes darting around. Do you believe James over me? It was clear to everyone that mother-in-law was lying. My husband was surprised, but this was between father-in-law and mother-in-law. The fact that my husband had an affair was true, and there was no sympathy for him since he did the same thing. The conversation neared its end. Mother-in-law was forced to sign the divorce papers and was told to pack her bags and leave. Without any resistance, mother-in-law left the house, and father-in-law and mother-in-law divorced that day. As for the compensation for my husband's divorce proceedings, father-in-law paid it off in a lump sum, believing it would be better for me. My husband would repay father-in-law. I packed my things to return to my parents' home and had them shipped. In this big house, thanks to father-in-law, my husband lived on the second floor and was restricted to certain areas so we didn't cross paths. I managed to avoid them for a whole month. Everything was settled, and on the moving day, the intercom rang, and to my surprise, my parents were on the screen. When I went to the front door, my father was already crying, and my mother was smiling. It seems that father-in-law had generously covered the travel expenses and arranged for everything. Although I had only told my parents that I'm getting a divorce, they already knew about the challenging year I had faced. Turns out my father had received a call from father-in-law about 6 months after my wedding. Father-in-law, being honest about the situation, had said, I'll take responsibility and discipline him. I'd like you to wait a little longer before coming to get her. After hearing everything, from mother-in-law to husband to father-in-law, my father understood that simply telling me to come back wouldn't convince me. It would be hard for anyone to accept infidelity claims about someone they love, especially without evidence or valid reasons. So he decided to trust father-in-law's judgment. Since then, 2 years have passed, and it seems the husband has been repaying father-in-law little by little. Thankfully, my job being fully remote from the start didn't tie me to a particular location. I still occasionally communicate with father-in-law, and my work is going well. Although I worried I might become wary of love, that's not the case. I already have a boyfriend, and I'm living a relaxed and happy life with my family.